They say hunger is a human condition, but Maria Vasquez knew better. She'd learned the truth at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in October, when the brownstone at 247 West 118th Street whispered her name through the radiator pipes. The building was starving, and it wanted what all forgotten things crave: to be remembered, to be loved, to matter again. But here's what the real estate developers never tell you about the old buildings of New York City. When you ignore their hunger long enough, they start feeding on the people inside. Maria pressed her palm against the cracked plaster wall of her grandmother's apartment, feeling the pulse beneath, the paint, the rhythm of 100 years of heartbeats absorbed into the bones of this place. She had 72 hours to save it. 72 hours before the wrecking ball would tear through these walls and scatter the ghosts of everyone who'd ever called this building home. But Maria wasn't just fighting for bricks and mortar. She was fighting for her grandmother's memory, for the Puerto Rican family who'd raised 6 children in apartment 3B, for the jazz musician who'd composed his masterpiece in the basement, for every soul who'd poured their life into these hungry, hungry walls. The building groaned around her, settling deeper into its foundation, and Maria understood with absolute certainty that some stories refused to be demolished. The memory keeper. Maria hadn't slept in 36 hours when she found the first letter. It slipped from between the floorboards in her grandmother's bedroom, apartment 4C. The same apartment where Abuela Rosa had lived for 53 years, where she'd taken her final breath just 6 months ago, leaving Marie alone in a city that suddenly felt too big and too empty all at once. The envelope was yellowed with age, the handwriting elegant and looping, addressed to someone named Eleanor Blackwood. Dated 1952. Maria's hands trembled as she unfolded the delicate paper, and for a moment she forgot about the eviction notice taped to her door. Forgot about the Meridian Development Corporation and their $70 million plan to replace her building with a luxury high-rise called the Pinnacle. "My dearest Eleanor," the letter began, "the building speaks to me in the dark hours before dawn. I know you think I'm mad, but I swear on my life that these walls remember everything. They remember the sound of your laughter, the way you sang while hanging laundry on the roof, the tears you shed when James didn't come home from the war. Buildings are not just wood and stone, my love. They are vessels for all the joy and sorrow we pour into them. And this building, our building, it hungers for our stories the way we hunger for bread." Maria read the letter 3 times, her eyes burning with exhaustion. And something else, something that felt like recognition. Her grandmother used to say the same thing, used to claim the building was alive in ways most people couldn't understand. Maria had dismissed it as the romantic nostalgia of an old woman who'd lived too long in one place. But now, sitting on the floor surrounded by the debris of her grandmother's life, she wondered if Abuela Rosa had been trying to tell her something important all along. The demolition was scheduled for Friday morning at 6 a.m. It was Tuesday night. Maria had received the final notice weeks ago, along with the relocation assistance check that was supposed to make everything okay. $12,000 to compensate for being ripped from the only home she'd ever known, from the building where her grandmother had arrived from Ponce in 1971 with nothing but a suitcase and a fierce determination to build a life in America. Maria stood and walked to the window, looking down at 118th Street. The neighborhood had changed so much in the last decade. The bodega where she'd bought candy as a child was now an organic juice bar. The discount furniture store had become a boutique selling $1,000 throw pillows. Even the people on the street looked different, younger, whiter, dressed in clothes that cost more than her monthly rent used to cost. But 247 West 118th Street remained, stubborn and defiant, its red brick facade weathered but dignified, its fire escapes zigzagging down the front like iron veins. 5 stories of history, 12 apartments that had housed hundreds of people over the decades, all of it about to be erased as if it had never existed at all. Her phone buzzed. It was James Chen from apartment 2A. The last remaining tenant besides herself. Everyone else had already taken their checks and left, scattered across the boroughs to smaller apartments, cheaper neighborhoods, places where they could afford to exist. "Did you see it?" James's text read. "Channel 7 is doing a story on the Meridian projects. They're calling it urban renewal. Maria, we can't let them get away with this." Maria's jaw tightened. Urban renewal, the same phrase they'd used in the 60s when they'd demolished entire neighborhoods, displaced thousands of families, destroyed communities in the name of progress. Her grandmother had lived through that era, had watched friends and neighbors forced from their homes, had seen the fabric of Harlem torn apart. and stitched back together in patterns that no longer made sense. She texted back, "Meet me in the basement in 20 minutes. Bring a flashlight." The basement of 247 West 118th Street was a place of legend among the building's residents. Abuela Rosa had forbidden Maria from going down there as a child, claiming it was dangerous, unstable, full of rats and rotting wood. But Maria knew the real reason. The basement was where the building kept its secrets. James was waiting by the door when she arrived, his flashlight already on, illuminating the narrow stairwell that descended into darkness. He was 72 years old, a retired postal worker, who'd moved into the building in 1983 with his wife, Linda. Linda had passed away 4 years ago, and James had been alone ever since, stubbornly refusing to leave the apartment where he could still feel her presence in every corner. "You sure about this?" James asked, but he was already descending the stairs. The basement smelled of mildew and old concrete, of time compressed into a physical sensation. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing a labyrinth of storage rooms, each one crammed with the abandoned possessions of former tenants. Boxes of books, broken furniture, rolled-up carpets, dusty lamps, bicycles with flat tires, all the remnants of lives that had moved on. But Maria wasn't interested in the storage rooms. She was looking for something else, something her grandmother had mentioned only once, during her final week of life when the morphine had loosened her tongue and freed the stories she'd kept locked inside for so long. "There's a room," Abuela Rosa had whispered, her voice thin as tissue paper. "Behind the furnace. The building's heart. That's where they kept the records, Mija. Everything. Every person who ever lived here. Every story, every memory. The building remembers, but someone has to listen." Maria found the door exactly where her grandmother had described it, hidden behind the massive old furnace that had been replaced decades ago but never removed. The door was small, barely 5 feet tall, made of thick oak that had somehow survived when everything else had rotted or been replaced. James helped her pull the furnace away from the wall, the metal screeching against the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the basement like a scream, and for a moment Maria could have sworn she heard the building itself respond. A deep groan that seemed to rise from the foundation. The door wasn't locked. It swung open with surprising ease, releasing a breath of air that smelled of paper and dust and time itself. Maria stepped through, ducking her head, and found herself in a room she could never have imagined existed. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, dozens of them, each drawer carefully labeled with years: 1898 to 1905, 1906 to 1915, 1916 to 1925. The room extended back farther than her flashlight could reach, disappearing into shadow. In the center stood a desk, and on that desk sat a leather-bound book, thick as a Bible, its cover embossed with words in gold leaf: "The Registry of 247 West 118th Street." Maria's hands shook as she opened the book. The first entry was dated October 3, 1898, written in the same elegant script as the letter she'd found upstairs. "Today we welcomed our first residents to 247 West 118th Street. Mr. and Mrs. Bernard Hoffman and their 3 children have taken apartment 1A. Mrs. Hoffman wept when she saw the gaslight fixtures, said they were the most beautiful things she'd ever seen. Mr. Hoffman, a tailor by trade, has already begun planning his workshop in the front room. The building is pleased to have them. It has been empty too long, hungry for the warmth of human life." Page after page, entry after entry, a complete record of every person who'd ever lived in the building. But these weren't just names and dates. They were stories, detailed accounts of births and deaths, celebrations and tragedies, the full spectrum of human experience contained within these walls. James stood beside her, reading over her shoulder, his breath catching as he found entries about his own life with Linda. "Look," he said, pointing to an entry from April 1983. "That's when we moved in. I didn't know anyone was keeping track of all this." "Someone was," Maria said. "Someone always was." She flipped forward through the years, watching the building's story unfold. The Hoffmans were replaced by the Kellys, who were replaced by the Washingtons, who were replaced by the Rodriguezes. Each family left its mark, added its chapter to the ongoing narrative. The building absorbed it all, held it all, remembered it all. And then Maria found her grandmother's entry, dated June 1971. "Today Rosa Vasquez arrived from Puerto Rico. She is 29 years old, alone, frightened, but determined. She speaks little English, but her eyes are fierce with hope. She has taken apartment 4C. The building welcomes her. It senses that she will stay a long time, that her story will become one of the important ones, woven deep into the foundation. Already the walls are learning the rhythm of her footsteps, the sound of her voice as she sings old songs from her homeland. The building is honored to shelter her. Tears streamed down Maria's face. She read entry after entry about her grandmother, about her mother's birth in apartment 4C in 1975, about her own birth in the same apartment in 1995. The building had been watching, recording, remembering her entire life. But the entry stopped in 2019. The final page was dated December 31st, 2019, and after that, nothing but blank pages. Who was writing this? James asked. Who kept the registry? Maria didn't know, but as she stood in that hidden room, surrounded by a century of story, she understood what her grandmother had been trying to tell her. The building wasn't just brick and mortar. It was a living archive, a repository of human experience, and if it was demolished, all of this would be lost. Not just the physical structure, but the memories, the stories, the proof that all these lives had mattered. Her phone buzzed again. Another text, this time from a number she didn't recognize. Ms. Vasquez. This is David Park from the New York Historical Society. I received your email about 247 West 118th Street. I'd like to discuss the building's historical significance. Can you meet tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.? This could be important. Maria's heart raced. She didn't remember sending any email to the Historical Society. She looked at James, who shrugged, EQ, wholly confused. But then she noticed something else. The leather-bound registry was open to a new page. And there, in that same elegant script, was a fresh entry dated today. Maria Vasquez has found the heart of the building. She understands now what is at stake. The building has called for help, has reached across the digital void to summon allies. Tomorrow begins the fight. The building is hungry, yes, but not for destruction. It hungers for continuation, for its story to go on. Maria will be its voice. She must not fail. Maria's skin prickled with goosebumps. The building was communicating with her, had somehow sent an email on her behalf, was actively participating in its own salvation. We need to photograph everything, she said, her voice steady despite the strangeness of what was happening. Every page of this registry, every document in these filing cabinets. If the Historical Society is willing to listen, we need evidence. We need to show them what this building really is. They worked through the night, photographing page after page, document after document, birth certificates and death certificates, wedding invitations and funeral programs, letters and photographs and newspaper clippings, all carefully filed and preserved. The complete record of a community that had lived and loved and struggled within these walls. As dawn broke over Harlem, Maria and James emerged from the basement, exhausted but energized. They had 48 hours left, 48 to convince someone, anyone, that this building deserved to be saved. Maria looked up at the facade of 247 West 118th Street, at the windows where she could imagine all the faces of all the people who'd ever looked out at this street, and she made a promise. She would feed the building's hunger. She would give it what it craved most. She would make sure it was remembered. The Feast of Memories. David Park arrived at exactly 9 a.m., carrying a leather briefcase and an expression of professional skepticism that Maria recognized immediately. He was in his mid-40s, dressed in a crisp button-down and dark jeans, the uniform of academics who wanted to seem approachable but not too casual. She'd seen that look before on the faces of the city officials who'd processed her grandmother's death certificate, on the lawyers who'd explained the eviction proceedings, on everyone who'd ever had the power to help, but had chosen not to. But something changed when she took him to the basement. David Park was quiet as they descended the stairs, quiet as Maria unlocked the hidden room, quiet as he stepped inside and saw the filing cabinet stretching back into shadow. But when she handed him the registry, when he opened it and began to read his profession, skepticism crumbled like old plaster. "My God," he whispered. "Do you understand what this is?" "A record," Maria said simply. "No." David's hands trembled as he turned the pages. "This is unprecedented. We have archives, yes, but nothing like this. Nothing that captures the living experience of ordinary people with this kind of detail and continuity. Most historical records focus on the wealthy, the powerful, the people who could afford to have their stories preserved. But this, he looked up at her, his eyes bright with excitement. This is the story of everyone else. This is the real history of New York City. James leaned against one of the filing cabinets, his arms crossed. So you can stop the demolition. David's excitement faded slightly. I can try. If I can convince the Landmarks Preservation Commission that this building has significant historical value, they might grant it landmark status. But it's not guaranteed, and we only have, he checked his watch, 47 hours. The commission meets once a month, and the next meeting isn't until... They'll meet for this, Maria interrupted. They have to. David studied her face, then nodded slowly. Let me make some calls. While David worked his phone, pacing in the alley behind the building, Maria returned to apartment 4C. She needed to think, needed to understand what the building wanted from her. The registry had called David Park. What else could it do? She sat at her grandmother's kitchen table, the same table where she'd eaten breakfast every morning of her childhood, where Abuela Rosa had taught her to make sofrito and pastels, where they'd play dominoes on Sunday afternoons while the radio played salsa music. The table was scarred with decades of use, marked with the circular stains from countless coffee cups, the knife marks from thousands of meals prepared. Maria ran her fingers over the wood, and suddenly she could feel them, all the hands that had touched this table, all the meals that had been shared here, all the conversations and arguments and moments of quiet companionship. The building wasn't just remembering these things. It was offering them to her, feeding her its memories like a mother feeding her child. She closed her eyes and let the building speak. She saw Bernard Hoffman at his sewing machine in 1899, stitching a wedding dress for a customer while his children played on the floor. She saw Eleanor Blackwood in 1952, standing at a window in apartment 3A, watching the street below and weeping for her husband who would never come home from Korea. She saw the Rodriguez family in 1967. All 8 of them crowded into apartment 2B, somehow making it work, somehow finding room for love and laughter in those small rooms. She saw her grandmother arriving in 1971, young and terrified and brave, climbing these same stairs for the first time, opening the door to apartment 4C and deciding that this would be home. She saw her mother being born, saw herself as a child running through the hallways, saw every moment of her life from the building's perspective, held safe within its walls, and she understood. The building wasn't just hungry for memories. It was hungry to share them, to pass them on, to ensure that all these stories survived even if the physical structure did not. When Maria opened her eyes, she knew what she had to do. She spent the next 6 hours knocking on doors throughout Harlem, tracking down former residents of 247 West 118th Street. She used the registry as a guide, searching social media for names, making phone calls, sending messages. By 3 in the afternoon, she'd found 12 people who'd once lived in the building, and every single one of them agreed to come. They gathered in the courtyard behind the building at 7 p.m. 12 former residents, ranging in age from 25 to 91. David Park was there too, along with a camera crew from Channel 7 that he'd somehow convinced to cover the story. James had set up folding chairs and made coffee, and as the sun set over Harlem, they began to share their stories. Marcus Thompson, who'd lived in apartment 1B from 1963 to 1978, talked about the summer of 1969 when the whole building had gone up to the roof to watch the moon landing on a television someone had dragged up 5 flights of stairs. We all sat there together, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Black, white, Puerto Rican, didn't matter. We were all just humans watching humans do something impossible. The building brought us together that night. Jennifer Kowalski, who'd grown up in apartment 5A in the 1980s, described how the neighbors had taken care of her and her siblings when their mother was working 3 jobs to keep them fed. Mrs. Vasquez in 4C used to feed us, she said, looking at Maria. Your grandmother, she'd make extra rice and beans and send it down with you, remember? She saved us. This building saved us. One by one, they testified to the life that had happened within these walls. Births and deaths, first kisses and last goodbyes, celebrations and sorrows, all of it documented not in any official record but in the memories of the people who'd lived it. And Maria realized that the Channel 7 camera wasn't the only one recording. The building itself was absorbing these stories, feeding on them, growing stronger with each memory shared. She could feel it in the way the walls seemed to pulse. in the way the air itself felt charged with something electric and alive. David Park pulled her aside as the testimonials continued. "The commission agreed to an emergency meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m., he said. "But I have to be honest with you, Maria, even with all of this, even with the registry and the stories and the historical significance, Meridian Development has a lot of power in this city. They've already invested millions in this project. They're not going to back down easily." "Neither am I," Maria said. That night, she slept in her grandmother's bed for the first time since Abuela Rosa had died. She'd been avoiding it, couldn't bear the thought of lying where her grandmother had taken her last breath. But now it felt important, felt necessary. She dreamed of T. Building's entire history at once, a century of moments compressed into a single vision. She saw the original architect drawing the plans, saw the construction workers laying the foundation, saw the first family moving in and the last family moving out. She saw wars and depressions, victories and defeats, the full cycle of American life played out within these walls, and she saw the future, two possible futures. In one, the building fell to the wrecking ball. The stories scattered like dust, the memories lost. In the other, the building stood, preserved, transformed into something new while honoring everything that had come before. The choice, the building seemed to say, was not entirely hers, but her voice would matter. Maria woke at dawn on Thursday, the day of the commission meeting, the last day before the demolition. She dressed carefully in the suit she'd worn to her grandmother's funeral, the only formal outfit she owned. James met her downstairs, wearing a tie for the first time in years. The Landmarks Preservation Commission met in a sleek build downtown, all glass and steel, the architectural opposite of 247 West 118th Street. Maria felt out of place the moment she walked through the doors, felt the weight of institutional power pressing down on her. The commission consisted of 11 members seated at a long table. Behind them sat representatives from Meridian Development, 3 lawyers in expensive suits, and a man Maria recognized from the business bag. Richard Chen, the CEO of Meridian, a billionaire who collected buildings the way some people collected stamps. David Park presented the case for landmark status, his voice steady and professional. He showed photographs of the registry, shared testimonials from former residents, explained the historical significance of the building as a record of immigration, gentrification, and community resilience. The commission members listened politely, asked thoughtful questions, and Maria began to hope. Then Richard Chen spoke. "I sympathize with the emotional attachment to this building," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I really do, but we need to be realistic about the future of this city. New York needs housing, needs development, needs to grow. We can't preserve every old building just because people have fond memories of it. The Pinnacle will provide 200 units of mixed-income housing, will create jobs, will contribute to the tax base. What does 247 West 118th Street offer? Outdated apartments, lead paint, asbestos, structural issues that would cost millions to fix. Sometimes we have to let go of the past to build the future." One of the commissioners, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, leaned forward. "Mr. Park, while the registry is certainly interesting from an archival perspective, does the building itself have any architectural significance? Was it designed by anyone notable? Does it represent a particular style or period?" David hesitated, and Maria's heart sank. The building was beautiful to her, but she knew it wasn't special in the way the commission meant. It was just a typical brownstone, one of thousands built at the turn of the century. "The architecture is representative of the period," David began, "but the significance here is social and cultural rather than." "Then this is a preservation issue, not a landmarks issue," another commissioner interrupted. "And while we certainly value historical preservation, our mandate is to protect buildings of architectural and cultural significance, not to prevent all development." Maria felt the decision slipping away. They were going to vote no. The building would fall. Everything would be lost. And then she heard it sound like a sigh, like the building itself exhaling through the ventilation system. The lights flickered. Several commissioners looked up, startled. Maria stood, knowing she probably wasn't supposed to speak, not caring. "You're right," she said. "The building isn't architecturally significant. It's not particularly beautiful or notable, but that's exactly why it matters." Richard Chen started to object, but the commission chair held up a hand. "Let her speak." "New York is full of monuments to rich people," Maria continued, the words pouring out of her now. "Buildings designed by famous architects, preserved because they're beautiful or because someone important lived there. But what about everyone else? What about the millions of ordinary people who built this city with their labor and their lives? Don't their stories matter too? This building is a monument to them. To my grandmother who came here with nothing and died here with a community. To the postal worker and the tailor and the jazz musician and the single mother and all the people who made New York what it is. She pulled out her phone and showed them a photograph of the registry, zoomed in on a single entry from 1945. "This is Andrew Morrison," she said. "He lived in apartment 3C and worked as a porter at Grand Central Terminal. Every day for 30 years, he helped people find their trains, carried their luggage, made them feel welcome in this city. He died in 1975, and nobody remembers him except this building. Is his life worth less because he wasn't famous? Does his story matter less because he wasn't wealthy?" The room was silent. Even Richard Chen had stopped looking at his phone. "If you demolish this building, you're not just destroying brick and mortar," Maria said. "You're saying that ordinary lives don't matter, that only the rich and powerful deserve to be remembered. You're erasing 100 years of history because it's not the kind of history that impresses tourists or sells coffee table books." She looked directly at the commission chair. "I'm not asking you to stop all development. I'm asking you to acknowledge that some things are worth more than profit. This building is hungry. It's been hungry for years, starving for recognition, for someone to see its value. And if you let it die, if you let it be demolished, you're saying that hunger doesn't matter, that the people who lived there don't matter, that I don't matter." The chair studied Maria for a long moment, then looked at her fellow commissioners. "I'd like to propose a 30-day stay on the demolition while we conduct a full historical review." 30 days? Richard Chen stood. "That's unacceptable. We have contractors scheduled, permits approved, investors waiting. Every day of delay costs this company hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then perhaps you should have done your due diligence before purchasing the property," the chair replied coolly. "This commission has the authority to order a stay pending review." All in favor? 8 hands went up. The building had been granted a reprieve. Maria's knees went weak with relief. 30 days. It wasn't permanent salvation, but it was a chance. Outside the building, David Park grabbed her in a hug. "That was incredible," he said. "I've been doing this for 20 years and I've never seen anyone speak like that." But Maria barely heard him. She was thinking about what came next, about how to turn 30 days into forever. The answer came that evening, back at 247 West 118th Street, when she found a new entry in the registry. "Maria Vasquez has fed the building's hunger with words and passion. But words alone cannot sustain. The building needs a new purpose, a new way to matter. It cannot remain frozen in amber, a museum to the past. It must evolve, must find a way to serve the future while honoring what came before." The answer is in the question. What does the city need? What can the building provide? Maria read the entry 3 times, then walked through the empty apartments, seeing them with new eyes. 12 units, most in need of renovation but structurally sound. A basement that could be converted into something useful, a roof that offered views of the whole neighborhood. By midnight, she had a plan. She spent the next week working 18-hour days, assembling a proposal with David's help, recruiting allies, building support. She reached out to housing advocacy groups, to community organizations, to former residents who'd scattered across the city. She made her case to anyone who would listen. 247 West 118th Street could become something new, a community land trust, owned collectively by its residents and the surrounding neighborhood. The apartments would be renovated and rented at permanently affordable rates to people who actually lived and worked in Harlem, not wealthy newcomers looking for authentic urban experiences. The basement would house the building's archive, open to researchers and community members. The ground floor could host a community space, workshops, meetings, celebrations. The building could continue to do what it had always done: shelter people, preserve stories, create community, but in a way that acknowledged the realities of 2026 WI. Lee refusing to surrender to them. When Maria presented the proposal to the Landmarks Preservation Commission 3 weeks later, she brought 30 former residents with her. They filled the room, a living testament to the building's importance. And they brought something else: signatures. 1,200 signatures from Harlem residents who supported the community land trust, who wanted to see the building saved, Richard Chen fought hard. He offered compromises, proposed memorials, suggested plaques. But Maria held firm. The building wasn't asking to be commemorated. It was asking to live. The vote was close 6-5, but it was enough. The commission granted the building landmark status with the condition that it be preserved as a community land trust. Meridian Development was forced to sell the property at a fraction of what they'd planned to make from the pinnacle. On the day the sale was finalized, Maria stood in the courtyard with James and David and 50 other people who'd come to celebrate. Someone had brought champagne. Someone else had brought a speaker and was playing music from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the soundtrack of the building's history. Maria raised her glass. To 247 West 118th Street, she said. May it never go hungry again. But later that night, alone in apartment 4C, she opened the registry one final time. There was a new entry, the elegant script somehow conveying emotion through the careful formation of each letter. The building thanks Maria Vasquez. She has given it what it hungered for most. Not just preservation, but purpose. The stories will continue. New families will add their chapters. The registry will grow. And Maria, daughter of Rosa, granddaughter of this building, will be remembered as the one who understood that buildings are not monuments to the dead, but vessels for the living. The hunger is satisfied. The feast continues. The building is home. Maria pressed her palm against the wall, feeling the pulse beneath the plaster, stronger now, steadier. She thought about her grandmother, about all the people who'd lived and loved within these walls, about all the people yet to come. Outside her window, New York City glittered and roared, endless and hungry, always consuming, always transforming. Buildings rose and fell like tides, neighborhoods changed, people came and went. Nothing stayed the same, except this. Except 247 West 118th Street, which would stand as proof that some hungers could be satisfied, not through consumption but through connection, not through destruction but through remembrance. Maria smiled, closed the registry, and went to bed in her grandmother's apartment in the building that had saved her just as surely as she had saved it. The building settled into its foundation with a satisfied groan, fed at last, ready for whatever came next.